Welcome to Public Affairs. This is a special show tonight because I'm in Chicago, Terry Martin's in Springfield, and Terry and I are going to bring you up to date on what's going on because we're taping this on May 2nd, and the big news with about a month left in the state legislature is going to be big taxes coming up for you folks. I don't know whether you're going to be happy about that. You're happy to hear about the progressive income tax, probably other regressive taxes. Oh, so much is going on. The budget, all sorts of other legislation will start flowing at the end of the session. I mean, Terry, it's exciting, right?
Well, it's the first legislative session for Governor Pritzker, and now, unlike the 4 years of a political standoff that we had going on with Governor Rauner and the Democratic majority, now the Democrats have a veto-proof majority in both the House and the Senate. They have all the statewide offices, and they have the governor. And the governor is giving his prescription for how to fix the state. And Jeff, as you know, the major issue the governor has been pushing is the graduated income tax. The state has a flat tax right now, and they're going to have a constitutional amendment passed to change that. And just yesterday, as we tape this, the Illinois Senate passed a resolution that would put a constitutional amendment on there. I don't know to what extent you've had a chance to look at that and your thoughts.
Well, Terry, before we get going, the governor's big splash for legislation early on when he came in, passed the minimum wage. I hear a lot of folks down in your neck of the woods, downstate, weren't so pleased to be hearing they're going to be required soon to be paying $15 an hour. They said some of the folks, maybe they could get by in Chicago where the cost of living is a little higher, but downstate, not so good. He said tough. I wonder if he'll live to regret it. So that's happened. He's done the minimum wage. Now the big thing is the progressive income tax. He thinks that'll solve his problem in the long run. Short run, he's got other problems this month, next month, so forth. We can talk about that. But in 2020, which is when it would kick in, or actually 2021, then he thinks he gets $3.4 billion. He needs way more. We can talk about that as we get in the show, but that is the big deal. Can Pritzker get his progressive income tax, sell it? Because number one, it's passed the state Senate on a party line vote with Democrats, but it's coming up to the House. I ask you, Terry Martin, I mean, the two of us, do we know whether this is going to make it by? Well, if he can't get any Republican votes, and he probably can't, can he pass it with get 71 of the 74 state House Democrats to vote for it?
It's not so clear in the House. The bets, I think, would be that he probably could get the votes. But here's the thing. You need the 3/5 vote of the legislature in both chambers. And then it has to go on the November ballot for 2020. And then for it to become a constitutional change, that has to be approved by 66% of the voters who are voting on that ballot measure, or 50% of all those who are participating in the election. So it is a questionable, probably the big fight will be in November of 2020. But then the issue is, what do we do in the meantime? Because even if we get that constitutional amendment and the governor gets his way, which will, according to his calculations, will produce $3.4 billion in additional revenue, that revenue wouldn't even begin to show up until 2021. So we have at least a full another year and something like a $3 billion budget hole in the existing budget. But
well, Terry, we're getting in the weeds. What do you think the Dems have to say about it? Just pick a random person like Will Guzzardi. What do you think Will would say about this?
Well, the Illinois Channel has been covering this for some time, and let's take a look because recently the City Club of Chicago, which has a lot of really excellent programs, put on a panel discussion with 2 Republicans and 2 Democrats. We have a bite coming up from Will Guzzardi, who kind of explains the rationale of why the governor feels that this is the best way to fix the financial woes of the state of Illinois. Let's take a listen.
One of the important things to remember is that income growth in this state and around the country has gone disproportionately to the very highest income brackets, right? In the past decades, we've seen that Basically, for middle income folks, wages have stayed stagnant, and for the folks at the very high end of the wage spectrum, wages have increased. So one of the real benefits of the fair tax system is that it will capture growth sustainably in the long term. Because we're capturing a higher percentage of the income that's at the very top tiers, it's going to help us actually build a more stable long-term tax structure, because we're finally focusing our taxes on the places where the wage growth really has occurred. So I think the structural deficit will be wiped out by implementing this fair tax, and our longer term challenges will be mitigated by the fact that we're finally focusing our tax structure on those brackets where the income growth has really been higher than elsewhere.
Well, Terry, we can fact check that real time in a sense. I mean, my good friend, Will Guzzardi, is being a little bit optimistic there. I mean, he's framing the choice. He's talking in a sense about capturing wealth of these high income people. You know, the other choice, the other way of looking at it, should we be creating wealth? So you can look at a small pie that's stagnant, and Will can say, hey, I want a big chunk of that. Those big fat wealthy guys got it. Or you can say, let's grow the pie. Let's create wealth. That should be the alternative view, that I guess the alternative party would be the Republicans. And, you know, we're fair and balanced here. So just objectively looking at that, I would think Terry, he says like top 1%, it's probably more like top 3%. That is, people earning more than $250,000 are going to start seeing a substantial boost in their taxes. You know, these are the people who create jobs. They can leave, Terry. They can leave. Capital is mobile. People are mobile. You know, they say, well, or where are they going to go to? Wisconsin? They've raised their taxes. Michigan? Well, have they raised them the same amount? Are their property taxes as high? It's the overall package. But more to the point, Terry, a lot of these people, they don't have to be that close by. They can go to Florida.
Jeff, look,
They
here's
can
the
go
thing,
to
that we have the Republicans, we said earlier, are not going to be voting for this, at least as far as we know, and I think that's probably what will hold up, that no Republicans will be voting for this constitutional amendment. A number of Republicans, including Dan McConchie, tried to have a constitutional amendment that would say we need a 2/3 vote to raise taxes. The theme that the Republicans are hitting on this graduated tax, the governor calls it the fair tax. That's a bit of his selling language. I'm going to use the term the graduated tax. The thing that the Republicans are saying is, look, once you pass that, there are no barriers to having that bracket creep and bringing it down, where the governor argues it's just the top 3% they're going to be paying the highest rates. The governor would argue that until you make $251,000, or $1 over 250,000, I should say, until you hit that barrier of annual income, that you're not going to be paying more. But the Republicans are not so sold. Let's take a look at recent, in that same panel that we just heard Mr. Guzzardi, we had State Senator Weaver, Chuck Weaver, talk about this issue to the extent that he doesn't trust what might happen. And then let me get your response when we come back from the bite.
People do not understand the different votes that will happen. So I'm going to put them into 3 buckets for you, the different votes that will happen. You hear of 2 of those. There's a third one I think is very important, okay? The first one's a constitutional amendment. All that does is take us from a flat tax to a graduated tax. It was established in 1970 with one very simple design. Flat taxes are harder to raise. Illinois needs discipline of a flat tax. That's a constitutional amendment. The next thing you hear a lot about, the fair tax, it's not in the constitutional amendment. I'm going to call it the introductory offer, okay? It's to tie us to that amendment so people are willing to take a bite on it, okay? Let's kind of think about like a cable introductory offer. I don't think it can stick. There is no way that we can keep with this tax that 97% of the people are going to tax 3% of the people. It will not happen.
So according to Senator Weaver, it's a little bit of a bait and switch. What say you?
Yeah, of course. If you look at the numbers, I mean, here's the number, folks, 3.4. Why is that number important? Because that's what Governor Pritzker estimates he will get in additional revenue in 2021 when that progressive income tax kicks in. He thinks that's all he needs to avoid the structural deficit. But you know, there are other viewpoints out there. Wirepoints.com says, you know, if you total up all the spending that Governor Pritzker was talking about during his campaign, you don't come up with 3.4 billion more. You come up with about 10 billion more. So if they're right, is he going to break his promise to the people he said we're going to find 10 billion more to spend? Or he's going to break his promise to people he said, hey, I'm not touching you if you're below the top 3% or 1%, however he wants to put it, or below 250,000. And you know what Chuck Weaver is saying, hey, he's going to have to go way into that. He's going to have to go less than 250,000. He's going to have to tax people making 200,000, making 150,000. Think about it. In Chicago, who's that? 150,000. If you're a teacher, median income 75,000, and you're a fireman, median income 75, a couple 150,000. Hey, you ain't rich, but you're going to be paying more. Maybe you go down to 100,000. The experience with progressive income taxes, as Chuck Weaver says, they start with that introductory offer. You know, like the guy late at night who's selling you the Vegematic. It turns out it's going to be way more costly than that $39.99 a month. You know, it might be $39 and might be $50 a month, might be $60. So, but seriously, that is the issue for people to be thinking about. When he said protect the proportional tax, I think what he means is that, you know, it's easy, relatively easy to get people to vote for a tax if they say, they're not paying it. So if they're in the bottom 97%, they say, okay, great, tax the other people. But if they think maybe you're hitting the people in 50% and above, well, then they're not so anxious to vote for that tax. So in that sense, a proportional tax is much harder to sell and protects the middle class people.
You know, the governor would point out that the 33 other states, I believe is the number, have a graduated income tax, and that their economies are doing, you know, okay. That they're, conversely, that the Illinois economy is not doing great with a flat tax. That's what he would argue. Now, others would point out that when the United States didn't have a income tax until 1913, and when they passed or the United States passed our constitutional amendment to have an income tax, they made the sale somewhat along the same lines of what we're hearing now. They were saying, you know, it's only going to be the rich people, the top 1%, and of course now we're all paying the income tax. So that's something that the Republicans, again, that's their main theme on this issue. Let's take one last listen to a bite. This we heard from the Republicans from the Senate with Chuck Weaver. Let's listen to the House Republican leader, Jim Durkin, as he recently addressed the City Club of Chicago and made his own points on this issue.
It's going to be close, and that is, my commitment is that this is not the way to solve our problems. It sounds easy. Let's beat up on the 6% and say that 94% will not have their taxes changed, which is a little bit different from a couple of months ago, so the taxes are going to be lower for those 94%. But what will happen is that we don't know what the rates will be if they pass this. The rates will be subject to change at the whim of the legislature based on whatever the shortfalls are in the budget or with state spending. And to me, that is not the way to go about it. And like I said earlier, the one last protection we have as taxpayers is in the Constitution called the flat tax. Every state, large state that's similar to Illinois that has seen this, run deficits. They run deficits. Just read what Governor Cuomo said a few weeks ago about what happened there. They had a $2.3 billion deficit by changing the tax code and doing it in the way that Illinois wants to do it.
And so there you have it, the Republicans just not trusting. Jim Durkin was saying, Jeff, that we don't know what the rates are. The governor would say, we do know what the rates are. I released it earlier this spring, what the rates are going to be. But I think the Republicans are just saying, you know, once you pass a constitutional amendment, you can then just, by the wave of the legislative hand, change those rates as you need. They argue, you know, you'll come back in 2, 3, 4 years and go, well, we're in a jam again, and oh shucks, we're going to have to lower those rates to take in more of the middle class taxpayers, and it's no longer going to be the top 3%. How does that argument resonate with you and to the people that you've been talking with?
You said before we went to that clip, you said 33 states have a progressive income tax. But you didn't mention that 10 states don't have any income tax, like Texas and Tennessee and Florida. And are those growth areas? And you might say, well, you could have gone, people could have left Illinois to go there before. But as you raise the taxes, right now it was a 5% for well-off people. And now it's going to be at least 8%. And if you're making $750,000, that covers all of the income. You're getting a 3% boost on $700,000. Terry, the quick math is that's $22,000. You think you might give more look at Florida and Texas and Tennessee than you would have. And if that's why a lot of Republicans call this a jobs tax, because when that wealthy person leaves, if that wealthy person is an entrepreneur, and driving a business, they're driving jobs. So there's that, Terry, and there are no reforms. Spending has gone up in the last 4 years, whatever you want to say, at least $4 billion. This budget we're talking about is $41 billion that he's proposing this year. And it was 35, well, maybe more. It's gone up maybe $6 billion in 4 years. I was off a little bit. So it was 35 in 2015. Now we're going toward 41. And he's balanced this with some accounting gimmicks and a lot of little things.
But
we're pretty close. What are we at, 40?
well, we're not even at 40. We're at about 39 something, but you always have a little bit of, you don't know until you kind of get to the end of the final accounting, but
Okay, but the point is, even if I take your numbers, it's gone up $4 billion in 4 years, and he's roughed out this budget with some what I'd call accounting gimmicks, a little bit of revenue here, regressive taxes. He neglects this. When you start taxing people's groceries, you start taxing their bags that they use to put their groceries in, you start raising taxes on cigarettes, on liquor, on a variety of things that low-income people pay for. That's a regressive tax. I mean, and if you don't have any reforms, Terry, 75% or so of our budget is driven by spending on education, spending on pensions,
well, the number
spending
one
on
is you got Medicaid and you got K through 12, and then you got law enforcement. There's 4 primary line items.
They're planning to raise education spending $350 million a year. That's a lot of bucks.
Look, the thing we have to say is the elephant in the room, so to speak, is the pensions. The pensions keep going up, and they're going up on automatic pilot because we have a 3% annual bump. And when you bump that billions of dollars, even by 3%, you add a great deal of additional spending every year. So the governor has said, no, that's a promise. We're not going to take those on. But when you have to try to then come up with money for all those other things you do want to put money into, like you mentioned, K-12, and the other thing is higher ed that got starved under the Rauner years when he wasn't passing a budget. The other thing I would say is higher education. The state of Illinois has reduced its spending on higher education by about 50% from around 2000 to now over the last 20 years. And we've seen a corresponding increase, therefore, in tuitions. But without some of the monies that were supposed to be coming over those 2 years when during the Rauner years we didn't even have a budget, one of the key issues, aside from the graduated tax, let's move on to another top issue. And that is we haven't had a capital bill in 10 years. And that's going to be one of the top priorities, to be passing a capital bill. We don't have a top line number right now. They're trying to sort that out. Some of the numbers I've heard speculated that it might be in the neighborhood of $35 billion. We'll have to see if that pans out. But if they do spend that 35, it won't be in 1 year, but they would do a $35 billion bond issue. Let's listen to Senator Andy Menard, chairman of the Senate Appropriations Committee. He's talking about the hearings that they've had around the state where they've been listening to any number of people from municipal government to colleges and universities to hospitals about how they need some of these projects funded that haven't been funded in many years. Senator Menard recently at the Capitol.
Our process is fairly simple. We want to identify what the need is, so what is going to go out the door, what are priorities. That obviously is leading us down a path of identifying more priorities than, frankly, I think we have the ability to pay for, which means that prioritizing projects and balancing all that the needs are in the state are going to be a challenge. Equally as challenging is how to pay for whatever those needs are. So our process thus far is all revenue ideas are welcome at the table, and all revenue ideas are being discussed. I don't know of any that have been unilaterally dismissed, but we have focused on several, and I would expect within the next few weeks we would see both the beginning phases of a bill that would represent, I would hope, some bipartisan agreement on both the spending side and the revenue side.
So that's Senator Menard, who expressed from his victory last year on so-called education funding reform. I guess he's the father of the $350 million we're now obligated sort of to spend each year in addition on education. And now he'd like you to issue bonds for $35 billion. Hey, I might be a little bit cautious about that, because guess what, Terry? People should know the state of Illinois has a $200 billion unfunded pension hole. So they got to pay back all of the 13 million people, or the people who pay taxes, which is a lot fewer, $200 billion. They got to go to the markets now and issue bonds when they got a $200 billion that people aren't sure they can pay in pensions, and say, we'll buy your bonds for $35 billion. Hey, I think we need to slow down on the spending, and the progressive income tax gives you $3 billion a year. Maybe we should look at amending the Constitution so we can deal with the issue you mentioned of having a 3% COLA. We can't cut that, even if inflation's at 1%, unless we amend the Illinois Constitution to allow those benefits to be cut. Unless we pass legislation in the state of Illinois that, gives cities like Chicago the power to file for bankruptcy, because they got a bundle of $50 to $70 billion in unfunded bonds. Their mayor has just come down to Springfield, and she has a $300 million shortfall for this fall. Okay. And, are we going to give her that? We being the state taxpayers of Illinois? I mean, does J.B. Pritzker have that? And so reforms.
The point you're making, I would say, is it goes to point out that with this, everyone's feeling a squeeze. Jeff, when you look at it, it looks like we're going to be in a bit of a financial fix for some time.
Yeah, I don't think the progressive income tax is the solution that the governor thinks it is. I think we need to have a strategic plan. Some people, maybe it's the Republican Party, need to sit down and talk seriously about our liabilities, about the $200 billion pension hole, about the fact that $3.4 billion in additional revenue starting in fiscal 2021 doesn't do it if you don't have reforms. You got to slow down the spending side, and you need some way to deal with pensions. You got to think seriously about amending the Illinois Constitution, not so you can have a progressive income tax, but so you can cut benefits on pensions on those things you referred to earlier in the show, Terry. You need to think about possibly giving Chicago and other cities and villages the power of bankruptcy. You need to tell cities and villages they've got to start dealing with some of these issues. They can't look, as Mayor Lightfoot is, to Chicago, to the state of Illinois to bail them out. The state of Illinois has its own problems.
Well, look,
and the Republican Party.
The political reality is, on one hand, we've talked about the Illinois channels cover these issues, and a lot of people, including, as you mentioned, Mark Glennon earlier with Wire Points, a conservative analyst publishing financial information, he and many others have said there's no way that the state of Illinois and the city of Chicago are going to be able to bail themselves out of this problem until they do something to reduce the cost of the pensions. That was tried in the past, recently, but under Governor Quinn, it was ruled unconstitutional, as you well know. So we're in a bit of a fix. And the other thing I would say is with the leaders, with the political makeup of the government of Illinois right now, I don't think anyone is going to be making any move to pass a constitutional amendment to do anything about pensions.
Well, it's a golden opportunity for the Republican Party to have a resurgence. Obviously, they need one when they're down to 19 state senators and 44 state House Republicans, and nobody on the horizon to be a viable candidate for governor in 2020. They need a complete overhaul. And and the Democrats could be, thinking of the future and say maybe they should modify their ways. But it does seem like Illinois is on a collision course with disaster. I mean, you talked before, again, we talked about other states having progressive income taxes, other states being comparable on income tax to where we go if we raise it. Maybe that's true. Any or not, they're lower. But if our property tax is said to be the highest in the country, we have to have people who say, what is the tax burden on people in Illinois overall? Add up the sales tax, add up the income tax, add up the property tax. If it's way higher, who's going to come here, Terry? And, if our colleges are not competitive, because not so much the quality.
Let me jump in if I might, Jeff, just in closing. I should have brought this up earlier, but also there's a lot of issues. We spent a lot of time on two of them. The biggest financial issues, the graduated income tax, the hole in the budget, and we also talked about the capital. We also would note, just in passing, that the governor and the legislature are looking to have an expansion of gambling. That means Chicago would be getting some votes, Rockford might, Carbondale area might. That's all being determined right now. An expansion of gambling. They're looking to possibly have recreational marijuana sales. They think those would bring in some millions of dollars. So they're doing some of those things to expand some of the spending before they're going to get any of that money, if they are in fact successful as far as having a graduated income tax. And just this week we had a new, might be $1 billion industry on industrial hemp, and the state agriculture department just started taking applications for that. So some of that is also some of the other issues that are before the legislature, and then of course there's a whole plethora of other smaller bills, we might say, moving. You can't talk them all in a half an hour show, Jeff, but we appreciate us getting together on here.
Well, people should know we were talking about expanding late-term abortions, removing parental notice, expanding gun control. As you know, there's a lot of stuff at the end of the year. Some people, maybe they're cynical, say that's because Speaker Madigan knows what's going to be in there. Maybe Senate President Cullerton, maybe Pritzker, and that's it.
Well,
so they can get all this legislation.
Let's wrap up. And what I think we might look to do is once we get into the end of the session, we'll know what's what, and then we can do a review. In the meantime, keep doing the public affairs. We'll keep doing the Illinois channel. And we appreciate having the opportunity to do this joint appearance with you.
Thanks so much, Jerry.